Well, actually, she's a goat, not a sheep. One thing that tends to bother me with almost anything, but anime specifically, is wasted potential. I long for the days where I could look at things with eyes unclouded and see things without knowing deep down how they're going to play out. Today, though, this feeling encompasses a rather peculiar genre, one of monster girls. But perhaps that's only because I'm not thinking broadly enough. Like, what shows do you think of when someone talks about monster girls to you? What kind of show? But that's not all there is. You can always find gems in even the strangest of places. There could be a monster girl anime that ends up being rather compelling. Instead of focusing on the bodily aspects, we could have a deeper look into their society, how characters end up functioning and living in a world where these creatures exist. Is a centaur's life that anime?
My Little Pony, My Little Pony.
Well, it does try to tackle a lot of subjects, ranging from the feelings of its adolescent main characters, family values, inadequacy based on discrimination, the dynamics between different races, how young children process those differences for the first time, how the government acknowledges those differences, whether or not the actions that they take in spite of those differences is a bad thing. It's a big old load of clothes. I don't know if that's actually a phrase. If not, we're making it one. Regardless, it never forgets to ask the important questions. But that's just it. It's all about asking questions, but so far I feel like the show hasn't even begun to give any answers. Which is exactly what makes discussing it so difficult. Let me just say that if you wanted an anime that involved and spent time on looking at a centaur's vagina, you'll get that. But just not a story that's particularly interesting otherwise. So instead, let's take the opportunity to see where a centaur's life falls in regards to other monster girl shows. Hopefully we can get a better idea of the trends that this premise is accustomed to and where the appeal lies. Let's start with the subject of diversity. The best example is a show from earlier this year, Interviews with Monster Girls, or Demi-chan as it's popularly referred to as. Demi-chan has a lot on the surface that makes it fall into line with other entries in the genre, but at the same time, in certain aspects, it doesn't go far enough. It mostly follows the lives of 4 very particular monster girls who, for whatever reason, don't actually look like monster girls. The positive side to this choice in character design is that our heroines are much easier to relate with. They are visually human for the most part, and all of them certainly so from the neck down, but at the same time, doesn't that kind of negate the point of the show? Granted, we do spend a lot of time examining the less obvious traits of these characters, from an aversion to heat to suddenly freezing entire rooms without realizing it. Demi-chan's take on Monster Girls is like an anime equivalent of X-Men, without the fighting between mutants part. They get character arcs that focus on how they blend in, how to control the things that make them unique, and how, despite some major differences biologically, they really aren't all that different from regular people in a lot of ways. Of course, Demi-chan is more of an exception rather than the rule, which brings us to a series that is almost the exact opposite. Where Demi-chan has minimal fan service and major focus on societal forces, Monster Musume from 2015 has major fetishizing and a moral about discrimination that feels really tacked on. Not to mention, it incorporates aspects from the popular and fiendishly overused harem genre, resulting in a show that, I'll be honest, was not to my taste. I have many problems with the harem genre, most of which revolve around insulting the audience's intelligence, either with its setup, or the various almost impossible sexual situations that the characters find themselves in. It usually has a male lead who might as well always be the same guy every time, from the amount of personality he's given. And I'd much prefer it if you could not always assume that every situation would end with a female character being placed in an embarrassing situation, followed by blaming the shit out of the male lead. only to then be right. But I digress. Monster Musume does at times have a level of self-awareness, and while it likes to take the traits of the various monster girls and use those as an excuse for ecchi situations, some of them turn out to be rather well thought out, from either a societal or biological standpoint. If there's one thing that I can't blame it for, it's going all out with its shallow premise, but it doesn't mean that I have to like it. But before charging back into a Centaur's life, there's one more series that I want to cover, one that's a bit more family-friendly. Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. Now, I realize that some people might not think of this to be a monster girl anime, as there's only one kind of monster girl, but for the sake of argument, let's look at it through that lens. This is on the far side of the spectrum that we are looking at, while not shying away from the things that have apparently become standard, not with just the genre, but with anime as a whole. It's a show that acts as a sort of microcosm for how this particular type of monster girl would be able to live, but under a very secretive social situation. The dragons are not known to exist by society at large. There are not government divisions dedicated to their care or laws for their treatment. Dragon Maid just doesn't go that far. Instead, it focuses heavily on the small place that does matter, within Kobayashi's home. Instead of tackling how society views these girls, it looks at just how Kobayashi looks at them, how she deals with them, how she learns to live and interact with them in meaningful ways. There's a lot of heart to Kobayashi that even anime without monster girls could learn from, but within the genre, it's the kind of focused storytelling that I'd like to see a lot more of. Like, don't get me wrong, it has fan service, but it doesn't rely on it in the same way that other shows do. I'd argue that in Dragon Maid, the TNA helps strengthen the comedic aspect of the show rather than distract from it. Which brings us back to A Centaur's Life. On the outset, I thought that the series was going to take the base topics made relevant with Demi-chan and apply them to more monster-like monster girls. And to some extent, it has. The monster girls that exist in A Centaur's Life are far more varied, with the structure of their bodies having far bigger implications. The society itself is also quite different, as traditional humans don't exist in this universe, and the shared characteristics of everyone is just kind of how different species have evolved. It's an interesting take because it examines how these various species interact with one another, rather than constantly comparing them to normal humans. Like Monster Musume, there's a lot of thought put into how norms would change in this world, like a cat-like character who has his glasses connect at the top of his head, rather than resting on the side because his ears are in a different spot than a human's. But despite having no humans, so much of how the society feels and operates is eerily close to our own. However, the real problem is that it is a series that is trying to play it safe. For example, in one episode, they bring up how a snake girl trying to smile might not come out the way they expected it to. Naturally, everyone's shocked, but Sheep Girl here does bring up a good point.
下手したら特定の形態に対する差別意識と取られるよ。どうしよう。差別とかそんなんじゃないよ。
From then on, the show goes into how various myths were built up about snake people and how that's harmful to perfectly meaningful interactions.
映画の化け物と一緒にしないでください。このような誤解を取り除くために私は来たのですから。
And yes, stuff like this is important because it is realistic, but it's moments like this that make me scratch my head and wonder what the show is trying to accomplish. You know, other than the whole, it's what's on the inside that matters moral, which by itself is so corny that it means nothing. It has a reasonable amount of fan service for a more upbeat anime with focus on characters' chests, and also some weird design choices for the merfolk. Seriously, why create an artificial thigh gap here? There's no biological advantage to it, so why do it? Oh, right, for the people with thigh fetishes, perhaps.
Extra thick!
A Centaur's Life is not trying to rock the boat, but at the same time, it risks being unremarkable. Demi-chan may not be as full to the brim, but its characters are how it defines itself. Musume may alienate many with its focus on ecchi, but it can still at least be entertaining in that way. And the heart that exists in Maid Dragon is something that sets it apart from almost every other series that has come out in 2017 so far. So there's much to live up to, but it hasn't yet. These anime have their various strengths and weaknesses, but you can't call any of them unremarkable. But as for a Centaur's life, I'm not so sure. It needs to find a stronger footing, give us a reason to enjoy these characters and the world, either for the comedy that they provide, the heart that they can contain, or the problems that they can face. Because without that, you just have another show that's nothing but a premise. And right now, when we've already seen various unique Monster Girl shows take the spotlight, it might not be the best time for that.
Take it away, Gabe. Throw your hands up, then point them to the floor. Here's what to do, now get down on all fours. Just bounce around, it's easy, follow me. Go crazy now, when beep beep like a sheep.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I would like to thank my patrons for supporting these videos, as without them, they would not be possible. More specifically, though, I would like to thank Victor Ekmark, Joshua Garcia, Hedro Leon, Bing Theo, Robert Chumzai, Calhoun Boy, and Siri Yamako for being especially awesome. And until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, stay frosty.